General Grievous was one of the most notorious Jedi killers of his era. He was trained specifically by Dooku for this purpose, and he was extremely good at it. So good that he made it both a science and an art, beginning his own collection of lightsabers. His ideals were simply to eradicate all Jedi life in the galaxy, and in pursuit of that mission, it's possible that he has killed hundreds of them. But these were the Jedi of the Clone Wars era, a confused lot who were significantly held back in the Force. So what if we made Grievous pick on someone his own size? What would happen if we were to somehow jettison him back in time and have the droid general facing the Jedi of the Old Republic? Greetings lore junkies, and welcome back to the archives. In today's holocron, we want to examine how well General Grievous would do if he were dropped in the middle of the Great Galactic War between the Old Republic and Vitiate's Sith Empire. We will examine his experience in this time, and his approach to warring with Jedi of the Old Republic. But chiefly, we want to know how well he could hold up against the Jedi of a more lethal era. So without further ado, let's begin. It's important to first talk about why Grievous was such a threat to the Jedi Order of the Clone Wars specifically. As it was revealed by Mace Windu and Yoda in Attack of the Clones, the Jedi's connection in the Force had been diminished. This in large part is due to the veil of the dark side that Sidious had used to blind their vision. They were unable to properly see into the future or discern the truth behind the war that they now faced. With the lack of insight came a lack of focus and of peace, which impaired their ability to tap into the Force. With this in mind, they were dying left and right during the Clone Wars, and rarely prevailed in actual lightsaber duels. But before the Clone Wars, the Jedi of the Republic Classic era found themselves struggling against opponents of real merit. For 1,000 years at this point, they had been enjoying a period of peace and prosperity in the Republic. The most dangerous foes a Jedi would face in this time were pirates, gangsters, or terrorists, and in extremely rare cases, fallen Jedi. The first real challenge came with the Yinchori uprising in the year 33 BBY. Despite having won that conflict, many Jedi died, and it became a humiliation for the Jedi Order, as well as the Supreme Chancellor Valorum, which Palpatine had engineered it to be. Around this time, even non-Force wielders were able to pull one over on Jedi Masters. Even a council member like Yarel Poof, a master of esoteric abilities and of the Force, was taken out by a knife. It was in this environment that Grievous was introduced, a machine of pure death with a thirst for Jedi blood. He was engineered by Sandhill to operate on a level of a Jedi Master, outclassing their strength and speed by a margin. He was so fast that he could dodge force pushes and blaster fire with ease, so powerful that he could crush armor and skulls, tear durasteel asunder, and endure the destructive force bellow of an Ithorian Jedi. Grievous was taught to master the art of fear, and inspire it within his Jedi prey to such a paralyzing degree that it severed their ability to touch the Force at all. And when Grievous finally struck, even the finest duelists could not stand up to him. But if strength and speed weren't enough, he typically overwhelmed his prey with his four limbs, all striking at various angles of attack. He could use his clawed feet to grab and throw his enemies while their blades were busy. Grievous destroyed Jedi with gleeful cruelty, and few of them could do anything to stop him. Even Jedi who did not fear Grievous struggled to actually defeat him. Kit Fisto was one of the only ones to defend against all four of his blades, and Fisto was still forced to retreat when Grievous called in backup. It took Obi-Wan Kenobi nearly 9 attempts to finally defeat Grievous. You see, while we often think of the Clone Wars Jedi as being excellent duelists, that was the exception rather than the rule. The truth of the matter is that very few of them actually engaged in saber-to-saber combat at all. This is why we talk about expert duelists in the Clone Wars as being such a big deal. These Jedi were training to fight multitudes of blaster-wielding foes. Like we said earlier, they went from pirates and terrorists to droid armies. Their focus was not on engaging someone like themselves in combat, but in surviving on the front lines of open battle. Forms such as Sarisu and Niman were prioritized for their defensive utility and their versatility. Their expectation was to regularly meet platoons of droids, not Sith, and not to meet Grievous. This is why so many of them fell to Dooku's dark acolytes who were trained in dueling. And this is why Grievous dominated in this era. So taking all that we know, let's assume that Grievous is, by some method, thrown several thousand years into the past. Maybe he interacted with a dangerous artifact, or a hyperspace accident occurred. Whatever happened though, Grievous is ripped out of the year 19 BBY and hurled into 3654 BBY, the year just before Darth Malgus' sacking of Coruscant. Once there, he would of course want to ally with the Sith, since those were his masters where he's from. Personally, we do believe that Vitiate's empire would have accepted the droid general, if nothing else than a morbid curiosity. As someone who claims to hate and kill Jedi as much as they do, they would give him a chance. However, the droid general would find it difficult to climb the ranks of a hyper-politicized Sith government. The Order of this time was incredibly xenophobic, and promoted largely based on one's political acumen, and so General Grievous would not be likely to find himself in a celebrated position unless he found a good way to prove himself. But the sphere of technology would likely be the first to take to him, since this sphere is where they always were developing new cybernetics and weapons for their soldiers. Grievous was a revolutionary creation even in his own era, so the Sith would want to study his makeup and attempt to replicate it. Grievous would enjoy the Empire's liberal usage of superweapons as well. In his time, he was captain of the ship known as the Malevolence, a ship that contained the massive fleet-destroying ion cannon. Grievous had also committed many atrocities in the Clone Wars, especially in its final year. To inspire fear of the Republic, he scourged many core and inner rim worlds with fire, scorching their landscapes and killing off as much natural life as he could. Since his brain had been modified to increase his cruelty and rage receptors, he thought as the Sith do. So Vitiate's empire would enjoy his ruthlessness, and undoubtedly put him in charge of some kind of superweapon. From this point, it would not be long until the first Jedi took notice of Grievous. That is, of course, assuming Grievous doesn't find them first. However, when he does, he's going to find a very different kind of Jedi waiting for him. The Republic that the droid general finds himself facing is nothing like the one of his time. They were largely united under the single purpose of destroying the Sith threat, and the Jedi were the ones calling the shots in this era, not the Senate. Grievous would quickly learn that the Jedi of this day were the exact opposite of the Clone Wars counterpart. Due to them having been embroiled in a 30-year war with their ancient enemies, the Jedi are battle-hardened warriors rather than passive peacekeepers. Padawans were all given emergency training to make them into powerful champions of the light, and then rush to the front lines of the war. According to Star Wars: The Old Republic Encyclopedia, few can match the raw power of a trained Jedi Knight in combat. These brave beings spend their entire lives mastering the Force, testing themselves against all manner of challenges and enemies. By the time they are ready to pass their final trials to become a Jedi Knight, young Padawans have already spent more time in battle than the average veteran soldier. This is the direct inverse of the coddled and sheltered upbringing given to the Clone Wars Padawans. We see the result of this kind of training in the young Satele Shan of this era. At just 18, Shan was holding her own against Darth Vindican. By this point, she had received training from the legendary battlemaster Khao Sandaric, but they had still been taken by surprise by the arrival of Vitiate's Sith. And yet, these two Jedi held their own against two incredibly powerful Dark Lords. As the Great Galactic War progressed though, every knight was trained to fight Sith first and blaster enemies second. Dueling was a top priority since the Sith were the enemies that they needed to eliminate. Jedi Sentinels were at their most powerful in this era as well. The Sentinels were allowed to study the forbidden form of Form 7, and some were so adept at Force stealth that they could simply vanish from sight. Even Jedi Consulars were deadlier in this era, scholars and diplomats they may be, but they excelled in utilizing storms of telekinesis to dismantle groups of enemies. Some were powerful enough to conjure localized groundquakes with the Force even. The Old Republic Jedi also made a practice of wearing specialized armor. The Clone Wars Jedi did this for a while, but it was mostly to show their allegiance with the clones more than any form of practicality. The Old Republic armor, however, was meant to allow them to shrug off glancing blaster shots and reduce impact from Force explosions. This was all the while being perfectly segmented as to allow for freedom of movement. Some Jedi of the Old Republic even went as far as giving their armor cybernetic upgrades and implants to give them more strength and more stamina. The Sith of this era were not pulling their punches either. Almost every single month of the war, the Empire was unveiling newer and more dangerous experiments. If these Jedi were to encounter Grievous, their instinctual reaction would not be fear. Instead, we believe the Jedi would see nothing more than the Empire's next attempt at a superweapon. We believe that many Jedi of the Old Republic could match Grievous, if not outright exceed his skill with the lightsaber. They would be fast, nimble, and ready to accept the challenge. His forearms and his uncanny speed might throw a few of them for a loop, but in large, the Old Republic Jedi adapt quickly. We have to look directly at who the Clone Wars Jedi were fighting. Clone Wars Jedi were used to dueling assassins or commando droids. These were considered difficult enemies for this era. But the Old Republic Jedi needed to contend with Sith marauders and assassins that could enhance their speed with the Force. So Grievous, who was capable of blitzing Jedi, would find himself struggling to keep up with knights of this age. He would not last very long in 1v1 against Satele Shan or Ven Zalo, two duelists that gave Darth Malgus even a difficult time. Satele was able to outright overpower that monster with her raw Force powers, and Ven Zalo was one of the only Jedi Malgus actually respected purely based off of his skill. In the Old Republic novel, we learned that in order to take Zalo down, Malgus had to trick him by allowing Ven to elbow him in the face, granting the Sith an opening in Zalo's defenses. If either of these warriors faced down Grievous, they would utterly dismantle him. He could prove to be a sufficient challenge, but not one that would cause them lasting injury. What's almost pitiful is that the Jedi weren't the only ones on steroids in the Old Republic. The Republic itself was as well. The Republic was stronger, it had a bigger fleet and more elite foot soldiers. The clones of Jango Fett were bred from a genetically perfect template, given growth hormones and performance enhancers. And even the Fett clones found themselves at a loss when faced with one of Dooku's acolytes, but they still managed to force Grievous to flee on several occasions. When the clones grouped up against him, sometimes they were able to put him on the back foot. This was usually because Grievous gets arrogant, especially when he's fighting non-Force wielders. He doesn't use his high speed mode, and believes that he can take them out with just his bulk and 2 lightsabers. This pride is what nearly got him taken out by Gungans. But the Republic Trooper was in a league all their own. Most notoriously, these elite commandos were able to take on Sith warriors on the open battlefield, engaging them in fistfights and sometimes winning. Keep in mind, these soldiers were not genetically enhanced by any means. They did have the opportunity to outfit themselves with cybernetics, or to take performance-enhancing adrenals, but by themselves, they were just normal humans, albeit highly trained. Jace Malcolm was able to completely turn the tide of the Battle of Alderaan when Malgus launched a surprise attack. Using nothing but injured soldiers and guerrilla warfare, Malcolm was able to hold out against Imperial forces for weeks before the Republic could arrive. During this time, the Commandos dominated Sith in melee combat and even resisted Malgus's Force Lightning. The ARC troopers of the Clone Wars still managed to get Grievous to retreat for a time, and to Grievous's horror, he would find himself struggling immensely against the Old Republic Commandos. Rather than simply being forced to flee, he may even lose fights to a squad of these guys. To put things very plainly, General Grievous was not built for this era. He dominates in the Clone Wars, but that's because he's against a Republic and a Jedi Order that are not prepared for a war. But if we dropped him in the heat of the Great Galactic War, again a war that spanned 30 years, he would find himself as nothing more than the monster of the week. To put it harshly, he would be chewed up and spat back out, and he'd be left with a healthy fear of what the Jedi should have been. The truth is, the Jedi of the Old Republic were nothing like the Jedi of the Clone Wars. Decades of open war against the Sith reshaped them into something far more dangerous. These were not peacekeepers reluctantly holding lightsabers, but professional warriors forged by constant conflict. The war stripped away hesitation, fear, and complacency, and it left behind the greatest generation of Jedi duelists and Force combatants in galactic history, until perhaps the era of Luke Skywalker. Where the Clone Wars Jedi struggled under confusion and spiritual erosion, the Old Republic Jedi thrived in violence. They learned to adapt, they hardened, and they mastered the art of killing Sith. That contrast matters when judging Grievous. He is a terrifying predator, a lethal executioner, and a genuine threat to almost any Jedi. But the galaxy that he dominated in was not the most dangerous age of Force warfare. In the era of Vitiate, Grievous would not stand alone as a monster. The Sith Empire was actively forging beings worse. True, unadulterated Lords of the Sith, shaped by ritual, ideology, and centuries of accumulated dark side knowledge. Against such creatures, Grievous would no longer be the apex terror of a battlefield, but one weapon among many in an empire that specialized in creating monsters. And the final piece of the equation? The Jedi of the Old Republic were simply built different. They didn't carry the spiritual rot or the hesitation that fractured the other's connection to the Force that plagued the Clone Wars Jedi. They were not dulled by complacency or blinded by unseen manipulation. These generations of Jedi were forged in open war, trained to face Sith at their peak, and stripped of weaknesses that allowed figures like Grievous to dominate the later generation. But what do you think, my friends? Were we too hard on the General? Do you agree that the Old Republic was simply different? It was an explosive period in galactic history for sure, when all factions had to be at their absolute peak. This was a time when the Jedi trained like Sith, overcoming their weaknesses and testing their mettle against increasingly more powerful challenges. And when they reconnected with their home planet of Tython, the Jedi of this era got even stronger. The Legends version of General Grievous takes a lot of W's, but that's against a confused and a conflicted Jedi Order, and even against them, he has his limits. So let us know your thoughts in the comments down below, my friends. And as always, thank you so much for joining us here in the archives down below, and let me know if you would like to see more videos on the Old Republic Jedi and Sith. Just say the word and we'll get to work. As always, my friends, may the Force be with you, and have a phenomenal day.